Good afternoon, everyone. Indonesia, price controls on rice. Domestic price warnings, Sudan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar for rice. Poor man's fish tripling in price in Malaysia. Recommended rations in Zimbabwe not enough. Knock-on effects from regional shortages pushing prices in Korea. This will be regional. And I do believe Prohibition could be in the works again to try to save grain staples as we intensify into this grand solar minimum. Disease is rampant during grand solar minimums in human populations. You know that's going to knock on right into the animal kingdom. Food price rises in South Korea calling flocks. We're going to be reduced down to growing food in these areas of the planet, and this is going to turn into a global knock-on effect. And we're not talking about this right now. And while you're watching the video, please remember to subscribe to Adapt 2030 and click that bell so you can get the latest updates. So Indonesia, just a few months ago, started price controls for rice. What they did was they set maximum retail prices for farming communities to be able to sell into the market. Now what they were doing is forcing down the prices farmers can charge to try to keep inflation in check and protect consumers, meaning trying to keep themselves from being overthrown because angry rioting people for high food prices are a danger to their power. Now we're starting to see this already, and you have to understand, those of you in northern climes, you're used to eating grains and potatoes and bread, this kind of staple food. Well, you know what? Across Asia, where 3 billion people live, their main staple is rice. So the Western media is not covering these types of events. What's happening down here in Asia? Let's look at this as a regional model of knock-on effects that's going to overspill into the global level. Indonesia caps rice prices to keep food costs stable and avoid an overthrow. I've linked everything below so you can take a look at it. What's going on? We're familiar with Venezuela price caps because of what's happening down there with the instability in the government. But let's look at Malaysia as well. Food price inflation, and South Korea's food prices don't add up. So this, what they call the poor man's fish, has been a proxy, what they use for food inflation. And what they found is this price has tripled since 2015. The price of this fish is now 22 ringgit per kilogram, but it was 8 ringgit per kilogram. Interestingly, the official numbers put inflation for food at 3.6%, but you know that has been massaged numbers, and that's a polite way to put it. This is affecting the poor and low-income households. They're struggling right now to keep up with higher food costs, and the media tries to blame it away down there on higher prices for animal feed, poultry, and meat imports. And they put that amount alone at 5 billion ringgit, but the entire food import bill for the country was 45 billion ringgit. So they're trying to blame all the food price rises on something that's only 1/7 of the entire import for the country's needs for the year. Additionally, rice prices are increasing there. Now over to the FAO, we're taking a look at domestic price warnings. Sudan, we've seen food riots there where they called out the army and shot some people and killed them over bread prices and wheat prices. Just a couple weeks ago, I already did a story on that one. Sri Lanka rice, sharply reduced from 2017. Bangladesh, all-time cold right now. Their yields are not going to be very good. India is also not very good with the yield due to flooding and cold temperatures. And then Myanmar. Okay, they have a decent yield coming out, but they're exporting so much that the prices are rising in the country, and now the citizens there are saying, whoa, 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 we can't give away all of our rice. You need to bring those prices back down here at home. So where does this leave the rest of the importers that were importing Myanmar rice? Now they're going to be cut off. They're going to have to look for excess supply elsewhere. And you see around Asia, all these things happening with rice prices along with eggs and poultry and meat. Over to Zimbabwe, the amount of rations are just half of what they should be per person. Jumping over to a more developed nation, South Korea, knock-on effect there are these regional growers that supply these more developed nations. When they have shortages, Chinese cabbage output declined by almost 70%, prices up. And what you start to see is this intertwined web of regional producers and regional countries within themselves and their trading blocks. And this is the kind of knock-on effect where one country affects another and another's rice production, and as a push and pull. And this has the effect of just raising prices regionally. And the civil unrest is what most governments are worried about. And you got already people protesting on the streets in Indonesia, coming out of Malaysia, people complaining in the newspapers, op-eds. It's starting. Grand solar minimum is going to exacerbate this. We are just at the very tip of the rollover into the crop losses now. So from this year forward, the yields across the planet are going to be reduced. I know we still have some carryover stock in the silos of the wheat harvest, but the protein's not there either. So ton for ton, the ton of wheat coming out of the fields this year is definitely not equivalent to a ton coming out of the fields 10 years ago because the protein content's so different. Now when you start to map up all these regional knock-on effects, we'll be over to the right side of the chart here. You see that star pattern. Well, let's say that top left is Asia, and then the top right is Middle East. And then somewhere in the middle, we start to get all these overlapping knock-on effects that meet in the middle, and that's what happens on the left side of the chart here. This is going to be a global event of regional shortages, pushes and pulls, food price rises, curtailing of exports, etc. And all these regionals turn into a global. This is what people are not talking about so much. They're all like, oh, well, back home, it's great. Nothing's happening here. Well, open your eyes and look at the rest of the planet. The media has conditioned us to live in this bubble within 25 miles of our lives. Well, what happens to the rest of the planet that affects you? And when we look at grand solar minimum effects on diseases and plagues, they run rampant during grand solar minimums. And another thing that the U.S. media is not touching on too much is the outbreak of flu across Los Angeles, where it is so bad at this point, doctors are saying they've never seen anything like it in their 30-year careers. There's so many people coming into the hospitals that they're putting them in tents. This reminds me of something about that flu outbreak, influenza outbreak in the early 1900s. Now, since galactic cosmic rays are affecting the human body and the human species, you know that's going to knock on and affect the animal kingdom as well. So I'm going to use Korea as another example. They had to put down every bird in that country. That include ducks, pigeons, geese, chickens. They had an egg shortage, a poultry shortage, and just prices skyrocketed. So they were depending on other countries to supply them with these same eggs and chickens, etc. But those countries like China also started to have outbreaks where they took out entire flocks. And you can see how this is a push on eggs and poultry prices. So then people will switch. If that's expensive, what are they going to switch to? Well, they switched to ramen noodles, and then the ramen noodle price went up. And you're getting all these flip-flops and switches going on for now. But when we look at the global map here, anything 45 north and above in North America is going to go offline. Now, there's not so much production in the real far south of South America, but you've seen this year Brazil, Argentina flooding, out-of-season storms, cold. They're starting to get chipped away as well at their yields. So when we jump over to Europe, anything at 50 or 53 degrees north and above is going to go offline. That's parts of Russia, parts of Northern Europe. When we look at Australia, the same thing. The southern part of Australia is going to lose its wheat growing. It already had a terrible harvest this year. Coming over to Asia, anything 50, 55 north, that Heilongjiang, that whole area where China grows wheat, going to be offline. So where are we going to start to need to grow everything? We're going to be sandwiched as a planet down into this grow zone here. And when we look at the countries, Indonesia on the far right over here, they're already in price controls. Myanmar's going to have to limit their exports. Bangladesh is in terrible condition. Sri Lanka's not much better with their rice crop. India's got its entire set of problems that you don't even want to touch with a 10-foot pole. All of Africa, are you kidding me? They're in a drought. How are you going to build this infrastructure out so we can start supplying the entire planet with, we're not. That's it, we're not. And nobody's talking about this. Especially when you go over to the South American area. Great, Brazil, Argentina, huge food producers, but they're also starting to feel the first years of effects of declines due to grand solar minimum weather changes. Now the global warming crowd, great. If you want to say the weather change is changing, it is changing. I don't dispute that at all. It's just not from CO2. But your end effect is our crops are going to be affected also. So I'll agree with you. That's one thing I agree with on the global warming crowd. They say our crop production is going to be affected in the future due to climate change. I'm saying the same thing. Our crops are going to be affected and the yield's going to be reduced due to changes in our climate based on the sun's output. So we agree on at least something on that level. But Mexico, you're going to bring them online to supply the entire North American continent? Freezing conditions down in Florida, they just lost almost all their fruit. And it just goes on and on. And this is a discussion that the media does not want to tackle. So that's why I'm saying that, hey, prohibition's probably just somewhere around the corner. They cited the prohibition in the United States trying to save grain for the war effort. Now, you know for sure we're going into another huge global conflict here when this grand solar minimum really ramps up. It happens every time. There's not been one where there hasn't been at least several regional conflicts that have overflowed into something much greater. We would be bucking history if it didn't this time. So what had happened is the Volstead Act allowed people to produce wine and cider out of fruit, not grains. So looking back in history, if they forbade using grains to produce whiskey and beer, well, they allowed you to produce wines. And then you see here in California, grape growers increased their cultivation by 700% due to this particular loophole in the law there. There was even an opportunity to introduce a new grape varietal that had a thicker skin, so they could transport it further distances. So even in this danger, there's always opportunity. And along with the brainwashing of the Prohibition era, trying with this scary chart of the regular guy on the left is going to turn into a drunkard and become a criminal on the right, the same thing's happening today. Reefer madness. Well, at least we were sensible enough where we might be able to use hemp now for a lot of our needs moving forward. And remember, hemp seeds have a lot of protein in them. So if we're switching over and grain crops might not be so readily available, hemp grows without any pesticides or herbicides. It puts out a huge amount of seed, and that seed's protein rich and it grows everywhere. Opportunity in the danger. Thanks for watching the video. The reset button for our society has already been pressed. You're just going to need to live through it. This is happening in Asia. How much of your news media have you heard talking about all these events happening out here?